Hi, it's Karen Carroll here out in beautiful Conception Bay in Kingston, the land or the town of my father's birth and my grandfather, his birth as well. Pat Short was my grandfather on my father's side. So this is the land on which they had their home and they raised their family. And there is a house there now, but it's a much newer house. The old house has been gone for years. So I thought I would do the recitation that I have about my grandfather I've created. And it's going to be on my upcoming e-album that I'm going to release sometime later in 2021. So Pat Short was a fisherman, a sealer, wonderful man. And we got this story, I got this story from our cousin, Bill Short, who's now in his 90s, but God bless him, he's got a wonderful memory. So for a number of years, grandfather and dad and another uncle of mine, Uncle Fonts, and sometimes maybe Uncle Will, would leave here in Conception Bay where they normally fished, and they'd go to St. John's. They fish out of St. John's for the summer, and what they do is peddle their fish on the streets of St. John's, like I guess fishmongers. People call them the Irish workers, I guess, for that reason. Anyway, this one particular year, it would have been in probably the late 30s, before the Second World War, certainly, because the Second World War changed everything here in Newfoundland, economically and in a whole lot of other ways. But anyway, so this story occurs in that time frame. So that particular year when grandfather left here, he had decided he wanted to build a skiff in the fall of the year, a wooden boat, a wooden fishing boat. So the last day when they were leaving St. John's and coming home for the winter, our grandfather was left with a very difficult choice to make, shall we say. And so I call this Pat's Dream. I hope you enjoy it. And thanks to Cousin Bill for this story. What do fishermen dream, I wonder, when in their bunks at night? Do they dream of the perfect catch when the wind and tide's just right? Or do they dream of boats and ships that ride upon the waves to far off distant places where they would like to sail? Maybe some dream of the boat that they would like to make, of the day that they would launch her and look behind at her wake. When Pat Short from Kingston, Conception Bay, that year in the middle of May, left home to fish out of Old St. John's, he rode into the tide that was coming on. He was already a fisherman and a sealer of some renown, and he set a skiff he'd make that year when snows were on the ground. In his mind's eye he could see her, that sturdy wooden boat, made from Trinity Bay timbers that would keep her afloat. They would shape her and deck her and caulk her seams, that 28-foot skiff that he saw in his dreams. An Acadia engine would drive her. Somehow they would find a way to buy. Between the fishing and the sealing, they would give it a try. But for that summer, he and sons Fonts and Phil would head out of St. John's Port and catch fish on the grounds of Logie Bay and Blackhead, those strong, hard-working shorts. They would peddle their fish on the streets of the old town. They were Newfoundland's small boatmen, by then of world renown. The stink of fish was in the air, the downtown streets so grand, but they knew that it was the smell of money in this land. The summer came and went, and when fall was on the wind, it was time to head around Cape St. Francis, back to their Conception Bay home again. The fish was now sold, and the money it did bring had to last them through the cold weather until sealing in the spring. They bought and stowed the needed winter supplies. Pat had enough cash for one more thing to buy. Every year he'd head back home with a bottle of rum and share a drink with his brother Will, the older one. But the dream of the new skiff was fresh upon his mind, and for that he needed to buy a plane to shape and sculpt and rind. He only had enough money for one thing or the other. Would he buy the plane to build the boat, or the rum to share with his brother? At the shop where they sold the Stanley tools, he saw the plane sharp and handy. He held her in his hands and admired her, for she was a dandy. What he could do with her that winter as he shaped the skiff. His fisherman's hands were strong and his fingers thick. He knew that they would go across the barrens to cut the lumber in late fall. With the pit saw in the meadow, they would split it all. His eye would find the right curves in the spruce trees in the groves. They would rend their fine creation between Kingston and Spout Cove. He would teach his sons the way of working with the wood and, like a sculptor, shape the boat as his father taught him he could. But at the bond store, he could almost taste that sweet dark rum. He could smell the satisfaction of a fishing season done. He walked up and down Water Street on two minds. Which way would he decide? What way was he inclined? The bottle of rum was calling him back to the bond store. That once-a-year purchase that could his soul restore. It spoke to him of Christmas when the men would pass the bottle round and he'd say his favorite recitation and they'd sing of the holy ground. The day was wearing on. His time was getting short. They soon would have to leave and head out of St. John's Port. His choice, it must be made. The time was drawing nigh. Which way would he decide, his uncertainty running high? So, in the end, he chose the plane and left the bottle of rum behind. He was a man of action, the practical, working kind, and he could get by that winter without that bottle of rum. And Will would surely understand when he came back home with none. And when the winter came and they built that sturdy skiff, his mind was clear and steady, even if his joints were stiff. As they shaped the boards and planed them, as they caulked those wooden seams, she came alive before his eyes, that boat he saw in dreams. They bought the Acadia engine, of that he was so proud. The sealing money would pay her off over the years he allowed, and when they launched her in late spring on a freshening wind and rising tide, he had made the right choice that day. Pat knew it deep inside. He pushed her off the beach, the first run on her to make. Then he cast his eyes out over the horizon, and he looked behind at her wake. What do fishermen dream, I wonder, when in their bunks at night? Do they dream of the perfect catch, when the wind and tide's just right? Or do they dream of boats and ships that ride upon the waves, to far-off distant places where they would like to sail? Maybe some dream of the boat that they would like to make, the day that they would launch her and look behind at her wake. Thank you. Look for more YouTube posts and we'll let you know when I'm releasing my album. Thanks for listening.